Hello and welcome everyone. Thanks first of all, for sticking around still for this late afternoon session of mine. My name is Hans-Peter. I am working as a developer advocate at Red Hat. I joined our team of developer advocates basically sometime during last summer. And I'm really excited today to do an introductory session about Quarkus here. Now I know it's been a packed and quite long day for most of you, if not all of us, and I also know that I'm basically standing between you and I think a cool party that is coming up later tonight. So that being said, if you haven't heard it, there's a DevRocks party. You might still be able to get some invites or at the Red Hat booth right after that session. Maybe you are lucky and there are still some left. So the good news is this is just a short session. So we have basically 30 minutes of time, and that at the same time means I cannot even afford to spend too much time in the deck. There is very few slides. I will spend very little time on slides. Instead, the idea is that we try to explore Quarkus. We try to build something from scratch with it so that we can see how convenient Java development these days has become, in particular when you have cloud-native deployments in mind. So that being said, let me dive right in and try to understand what the goal for the next, I would say, 25 minutes or so will be. So the idea is that we are going to use Quarkus 3, which, by the way, was released just a few weeks ago, I think sometime in April, if I'm not mistaken. And we are using basically an automatically scaffolded project structure to start our Quarkus journey and explore how we can benefit from a few selected things that I want to show you today. Because, of course, in something like 20 minutes, we cannot deal with everything that Quarkus brings to the table. So the idea is we build a mini app that I'm using mini here for something that is extremely simple, but at the same time it is sufficient to show the convenient features that Quarkus gives to developers. We built two simple web endpoints that we call over HTTP, of course, and we have just some movie-related data that we are going to store somewhere, so we persist that to a database. The database will be MongoDB in that case, because that is a database that I'm quite familiar with and used a lot over the last years, so that's in this case my default choice for that simple app. This is where we store the movie-related data to. And then at the end, once we have done that and we have, initialized it with some sample data and stuff like that, we are going to build a container image for that so that we can finally deploy that whole application to Kubernetes. In my case, it will be OpenShift, or more specifically, the developer sandbox for OpenShift, which is available free of charge to you as well. So, two constraints that we want to keep in mind while doing all of that is we don't want to touch a Docker file. We don't even want to think about Docker or container files, as they are more generically called these days. And second, we don't want to manually mess around in YAML manifests. So we want to have a way that we can have those scaffolded automatically for us as well. With that, let's start. And most likely, when you start using Quarkus for the first time, you will also probably go to that page, code.quarkus.io, and start your journey from there. This is also what I'm going to do right now. So I'm going to that page here, just reloading to make sure that I have an internet connection, which looks good. And this is basically where you can start configuring your app. You can see really a plethora of really useful extensions coming in different categories. So when you do persistence, when you do messaging, when you do web development, so REST APIs and stuff like that, you find that extension catalog basically here as well. So you could pre-select those where you already know that you are going to use them in your app. And then you can scaffold that project right here. This is one way of doing it. You can choose also if you want to use Maven, like I'm going to use it in Maven because I'm used to that. When I started using Java many, many years ago, I even started with Ant and then at one point switched to Maven, so there was no Gradle, so I'm sticking with Maven. Java version and a few things like that, and then you generate that app. Another way would be that you download the Quarkus CLI. And in fact, I have that CLI on my machine, and that CLI is something that we are also going to use a lot during that coding session here. Because as you will see, the functionality that Quarkus CLI gives us is quite handy as well. We don't need to remember, I would say, slightly more complicated commands that you would use when you directly would use Maven or Gradle for that. So I'm a fan of the CLI because it makes life, I think, considerably easier to not having to type longer commands. So what I did, so basically you generate your app, you download the zip file, and that's it. You unzip that, and I did that already. And the only difference here, and I'm switching to the IDE right away, is that this project structure that was automatically generated, I'm just going to remove the target folder, which is not there from the very beginning. This comes, of course, when you build it for the first time. So this is basically what you get. You get auto-generated code. There is a REST resource there with one endpoint, and there is automatically generated test as well for that thing. I only basically did the initial commit for what was downloaded from that web page, so that I'm in a repository, which I'm also going to share later on. Additionally, there is some tags in that repository, so you can check out those tags to follow exactly the main steps that we are going through now together. So the first thing I'm going to do when you have that automatically generated project, in this case a Maven project, is you want to run the dev mode. And when you have the CLI, you just type Quarkus dev, and this starts the so-called dev mode of Quarkus. So it will now build the app, and it will start that app. Now that the app is already up and running, so I will just open my browser at localhost 8080, which is the default, and this then shows you this automatically generated index HTML page. It's two useful things are there. So first of all, there is this one REST endpoint that was already auto-generated, so that just says Hello REST Easy Reactive, nothing special about that. And the other really cool thing is the so-called dev UI. So I'm going there, and this is the new dev UI that looks like that since Quarkus 3. So Quarkus 2, and I'm just quickly going back to that, you can still use the old, like the previous dev UI that looked like that. I'm going back and use the new one. And in this dev UI, you see right away all the extensions that have been automatically used for when the project was scaffolded. And as we go along and add stuff, we will see more extensions here in that web UI as well, appearing basically automatically as we add them. We can inspect and change the configuration. If you take a look at there's like all the default configuration settings for Quarkus and the extensions we have at that point. Can be seen there, and you could even change that here, and this would add the application.properties file. Just to show that to you here, we have currently no application properties. The file is basically empty at that point. We will add some of those then as we go along. Another cool thing, very briefly, is the continuous testing. Remember I said one test was automatically generated, and I will just open that up. There is this test, and that just tests that endpoint to see if it responds with that static string that is coming back from that endpoint. And so when you go there and you say start, those tests will be started, and they are run. It's just one test. You could have hundreds here, and we see they are green, so they are passing, which is good. If I just show that to you, that this is nicely synchronized, of course, also into the terminal that you are running the dev mode in. So you see that the tests are passing at that point as well. So if I go, for instance, and make a mistake on purpose here, just I hit save, and you see the test is re-executed immediately, basically, and fails. So that's very handy when you start coding and have this and have a fast iteration cycles while you code along. You see immediately when tests break without doing anything in particular. Also here, like I said, it's synchronized with that nice web UI here automatically. So let me undo that again so that we have passing tests. And let's start now to build this app that we talked about very briefly at the beginning. So what we do is going to add first two extensions, right? Remember we said we want to persist some data, so we have obviously some kind of data class which we will call movie, and we will need to serialize that over HTTP as JSON. So I'm going to add a Quarkus extension called REST Easy Reactive Checksum for that. So checksum in this case will be used as of now to do that serialization from POJOs basically. What this command does, and again the CLI is quite handy there, is it manipulates the POM file basically. So what it does is it adds right here, it adds that extension. We see that since I'm in a Git repository, we see that diff here. So this was added by executing that command behind the scenes. What I'm also adding here is, not here, but here is another extension. Remember I said we want to persist to MongoDB, so we will add, in this case, an extension called MongoDB Panache. And Panache is this nice wrapper that gives us really convenient way to deal with persistence in MongoDB, so we don't have to operate on the Java driver directly when we interact with MongoDB. And again, what you see just adds that dependency at that point. But when we go back now, let me go back to the dev UI, what we see here is dev services. And the cool thing about dev services is that they enable us to refer to external systems such as databases, caches, messaging infrastructure such as traditional queues, RabbitMQ, or Kafka if you do event streaming. So if I open it really quick here, you see that there are a bunch of dev services available right now, and the list is growing basically with releases over time. So what these dev services give us is whenever we need some of these technologies to develop against, they will automatically detect that we want to work with them, and they basically based on test containers, we get automatically containers being launched in the background. So this primarily works with Docker, for instance, but it could also work with Podman if you're using Podman for running your containers. So we are interested, of course, in this case, in the MongoDB dev services. And let me just go there real quick to my app, and let me start adding that code that we need. So I will come up with a movie.java file here. I will extend now that I have that extension from Panache Mongo entity. I will give an annotation to that called Mongo entity as well. I will define the collection name of where this should be persisted in Mongo. And then I have a bunch of fields that I'm just going to quickly copy in, because in the interest of time, I think it's not interesting to see me type that stuff in. So this is just the members that we have in that data class here. So we have a title, a list of genres, a duration, if the movie is released, and the release year, basically. And what we get from doing that extension here is basically an active record pattern implementation from Panache MongoDB. And we can use a couple of simple methods based on that active record pattern, as we will see when we add the resource for that as a next step. So let me do that. Once we have that in place, let me add a movie resource.java. I will just make that, give it a path here. API/movie should be the, I should type a little bit better. It's a bit difficult to type on that laptop stand here. So get request it will be, and then we say public, we're gonna return a list of movie here, and we say all movies. And then we say, we import the list real quick, and then we say return movie, and you see the active record pattern here, and then we say list or. So that's all we need. I'm hitting save, and so the idea now is that when we try to access that, let me try that. What's going on here? Let's see what happened. Oh, that's interesting, right? It's one of those days where for some reasons, I just wanted to say that dev mode keeps running and keeps starting, but let's see what it does right now. So you see it spins up a container here automatically. I don't even need to do that. It detected the extension, and it knows I want to talk to MongoDB, and it starts the container because I have no database connection set in my properties. So it thinks, hey, I will give one to you with the default settings so that you can use it, okay? So now there's a database up and running, and let's see if we can access it. Another thing is missing, and it's good that it happened to me, because you see also that you get nice error messages. So obviously it complains about that we are missing a property. It doesn't know what the database name should be, where it should put that collection called movies to, because we didn't configure it, and that's fine. So let's fix that. Let me fix that and add that property to my application.properties file. And let's say devox UK here. I will hit save, and let me re-execute that again here. And then it takes a while, and then we get back an empty list. You don't see that because it's a bit, let me do that. I will move it here. We get back an empty list. I can also go to Postman. It's probably easier to see. Let me execute that from Postman again. If we say localhost 8080, we get back an empty list, and that's okay. We have no data, right? But it found the database that it automatically started for us in the background, thanks to dev services. And it realized, hey, all I have is basically an empty collection at that point, and so we see that empty list. So again, in the interest of time, all I'm doing to be able to add something is I will just copy in the code for having a get method by ID and being able to post some data to it. So we add 2 more endpoints to that REST service here. We import not only that, but actually all of the missing stuff, like so. And once we have that, we have these 2 endpoints that we can use. And again, the dev mode realizes there are now two more methods that we can call. Let's try that real quick. We can say create movie. We give it some movie data here that fits our data class, and it should insert that. And indeed, we created that. Panache takes care about adding this identifier, which in MongoDB is this _ID identifier that it automatically maps for us as well. So we can now, with that, of course, just use the second endpoint real quick that we had here, like so, and we get back just that one movie now. So it's a bit boring to have just one movie here. If we want to play around with more, very often you have the case that you need some sample data being loaded when you develop locally. And this is again where we can bring in another really nice extension that is part of Quarkus. So again, I keep the dev mode running here. I am adding an extension called Liquibase MongoDB. This does many things, so it can do a lot of things like schema definitions, it can do schema migrations, and it can define indexes and a lot of stuff that you can just have created automatically by Liquibase based on an XML definition or that, for instance, you hand it to. And so I prepared an XML definition that gives me, I think, 6,000 movies or something like that should get loaded when the application starts and basically right after bootstrapping the database. So this is where I will just go here and add a folder called Mongo under resources in my project. And then what I do is I will bring in a file that's called import XML. Again, there's nothing special about that file. This is a Liquibase XML definition, a database changelog. We say we want a collection called movies, and we want to insert several documents into that movie's collection, and then we have a list of actual movies that I downloaded from a sample file somewhere from the internet. Something like, and so an array of those that get loaded once we start the application again. And again, when we now have that in place, I will add 2 things. I will first of all tell Liquibase where to find that file, okay, because it can be called and put in different folders wherever you want to have it. And I will also tell it to actually apply the migrations at startup. So I will set that property to true. And this tells this Liquibase extension to kick in when the application starts, that after it has the database started, thanks to dev services, it will import all of that data automatically. So let me save that and let me basically go to my Postman and call the REST endpoint again. And it takes a while, and you see that now we have a much larger response of almost 1 megabyte, because it just takes all the movies now and serializes that directly. So you would want to have some paging and stuff like that. But you get the idea, just because by, again, adding that extension, making sure the file is in place and setting that property, I could call the endpoint again, and this whole thing, this whole automatic mechanism behind the scenes kicked in again and loaded that data up for me without me interacting with or shutting down and restarting anything of that in the background myself. Okay, so that's pretty cool. So now that we have this basic app that I talked about, let's talk about the other two things and understand how we can build container images, and on the one hand, and once we have those container images, how can we deploy them, in this case to Kubernetes, more specifically to the OpenShift developer sandbox, which is free of charge and which you can also use when you want to have something to experiment, a managed enterprise-ready cloud solution called OpenShift, which gives you that really great Kubernetes experience. So let's do that. So first of all, what we can do is we can directly say, without doing anything, in every Quarkus app that basically works like that, you could say Quarkus image build, and then I skip the tests. I mean, we have just one test, but I can say, please skip the tests. And then it would build an image. Let's try that. Let's do that. And what it would do here, basically, after building the app, if you look closely to the output, you see that at one point, right here, it applies a Docker build, it applies a Docker file. And that Docker file is something that I haven't written, obviously, because we never talked about, we never saw a Docker file. But Docker file was also automatically generated by scaffolding the whole project at the very beginning. So we have a few different flavors of Docker files here, targeting the JVM, then something called a legacy jar file. And then we have two others which are there when you want to compile your Java app to a native image. So this would be the Docker file where you would put your native executable that you compiled with GraalVM into. So that's one way of doing it. Sometimes you don't want to have container files at all, and just to show quickly the difference here is you don't even need to have a Docker file or a container file for that matter. Let me go out of the dev mode because we don't need it for now anymore. What we can do is you can just say, and I'm doing two more things because remember when we built a container image for that app, the app will run in production mode. It will not run in dev mode anymore that it did when I started the Quarkus dev mode locally. So obviously when we start that app, it wants to talk to a database, and when we are at that point, we need to provide it a database. So in my case, I will point it, and here I will add just two properties. I will point it to a real, an already deployed database running in the cloud. So I will just copy over that connection string to my app. So this tells the app, hey, when you run in prod mode, look for the database, for the MongoDB database right here. So we specify that connection string, and this runs in Azure somewhere, I guess in the Netherlands region or wherever I provisioned it. The prod prefix tells Quarkus this property is only relevant when it runs in prod mode. This means when I keep starting it locally in dev mode, I will still get these dev services and this local database so that I don't need to access the actual cloud database while I'm working locally. But when we deploy the container, it will read the data from there. And another thing, whenever I try to deploy my image elsewhere, of course, that image needs to be found in that environment. And so it makes sense that we give it an image, a fully qualified image name, including a registry where this image can be found after pushing it to that registry. In this case, it's Quay.io, and it's my own user, and it's just called DevFox Quarkus Love 101. And with that in place, I can say, I can slightly use a slightly different command for building my image. I can say Quarkus image build chip no tests. And this will build now an image using the chip project, which means there is no Docker file, no explicit Docker file needed or anything like that. and it built that image. Okay, so we see the difference here that it says it's using chip to do the actual image build, and it's not referring to any like pre-configured Docker file like we have seen before. So I did the image push already, so because I don't want to rely on pushing images on a conference Wi-Fi. So that image I pushed already 2 days ago. It contains the app that I just built right now, and it resides there on that Quay.io registry under my user. And so the last bit that is missing now is that we want to deploy that thing to Kubernetes, okay? And here I'm using the OpenShift developer sandbox that you can find here on redhatdevelopers.com/developer sandbox. I have it in the slides as well if you want to check it out later. And here I'm in my sandbox, right? And it doesn't contain any deployment or anything like that, so no pod is running at that point. I would just make sure that my Kubernetes context, I have many, is pointing to the proper sandbox, and that's the sandbox instance. And with that prepared, all I need to do now to deploy that containerized app is, I go again, I use the CLI here, and I'm saying Quarkus. I can't do it right now because what I forgot to do is one more thing. We need the YAML manifest that I talked about, right? And so again, this is just literally one extension away. I will say Quarkus add extension add Quarkus. In this case, I will say Minikube. You can use the OpenShift extension. You can use the Kubernetes extension. Basically, the difference is that you will end up with slightly different manifests that will be generated. And with that in place, all that's left for me to do is say Quarkus deploy, and Minikube in this case is the default that it will do. And now it will, in addition, it will scaffold the manifests, and it already applied them. Let's see here, it deployed to that OpenShift instance. And if we take a look in the target folder here, we see a Kubernetes subfolder, and this Kubernetes subfolder contains that minikube.yaml that was just scaffolded automatically right now, a service definition and a deployment, and the deployment referring to exactly that image down here that I already pushed beforehand, so that we don't have problems with pushing the image. But you get the idea. You can also configure it that during your build, the image is built and then automatically pushed as well. I didn't do that on purpose in this case, so that would also be an option. So yeah, just a moment. I'm about to wrap up, and we can then talk about it in the question. So here, just to show that to you, the app is running on OpenShift, and if I go there and just quickly hit the logs, we see that the app is coming up, and it's in this case, you see that it connects to the cloud database right here. So it found the database, and if we quickly go to the terminal, and then I'm about to wrap up with a few final slides. Local host 8080, because we are directly on the pod right now, and then we say API/movie, if I can type that correctly. And now it connects to the cloud database and downloads these 6,000 or something images that it returns over the REST call. So with that, let me go back. We have 3 more minutes left, it says here, which is fine because I'm about to wrap up anyway. So I think we can say we accomplished that mission, right? We built that simple app. It had REST endpoints. It had persistence. It auto-loaded sample data. We had a container image generated, and we deployed it. And I hope you see that Quarkus makes that whole process really, really convenient. It's a really, really fantastic developer experience, in my opinion. And just a few more resources to wrap it up. A free ebook, Modernizing Enterprise Java, written by 2 of my colleagues. So you can get that for free. You just register a Red Hat account and you can download it. Another thing, again, a hint for the developer sandbox, which you can use as a managed Kubernetes environment to learn about Kubernetes, to explore and to use it for demos and samples that I just did. Yeah, and then Quarkus itself, right? You have heard it probably that Quarkus 3 is there. I mentioned it briefly. We didn't have the time to discuss about all the goodness that Quarkus 3 brings, because then we would have probably discussed details of the announcement post and didn't have any time to explore it in this short session. So I thought it makes more sense to show that to you in action than to talk about the stuff. But I would really encourage you to read the blog post. Really cool stuff that was shipped with Quarkus 3 lately. With that, I thank you for your time. I thank you for listening. We have 1 minute left. This means there is not that much time left for questions, but I'm still here, so you can come with your questions to me anytime afterwards. And maybe, again, we see each other at the party later tonight. There might be some invites at the Red Hat booth for you to grab. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you. Questions? Yeah.
So my question was about the manifest.
Sorry, 1 moment. We have this.
So my question is about the deployment command you ran.
Yes.
It generated the manifest file for you. Can you configure some stuff yourself in there, like the port
Exactly.
numbers?
You can configure more or less everything in that by setting the proper application properties. So you could say, for instance, maybe I just show that YAML. So sometimes, for instance, you say, hey, I want to customize the image pool policy, right? It defaults to if not present. Maybe you want to have it always. And then you just override that application property and it will generate the YAML accordingly. What you can also do is, that's pretty nice, I didn't have the time to show that. Let's say I wouldn't have used the cloud database, right? Then it means when I deploy my app, it tries to find a database. And maybe instead of a cloud database, I just want to spin up a simple database in a container next to my app in the same cluster just for testing stuff. And then this would mean you would need to provide that YAML yourself in addition to what is auto-generated here, right? And so what you would then do is you would just go into your source folder, source main, and say Kubernetes here. It's written wrong, but it doesn't matter. I just wanted to show you where you put it, Kubernetes. And here you could add your own Minikube or OpenShift or whatever extension it is that you use. In this case, I used Minikube. So you would call it by default minikube.yaml. And whatever is in that YAML will be merged with the auto-generated YAML. So you could have additional resources that you want to have that are independent of your actual manifest that gets scaffolded for the app and have it merged and it will be deployed together by saying Quarkus deploy. So that's really cool.
Thank you. And I think it was the last question. You can still ask questions.
Okay, yeah,
One
just ask me anytime. And again, thanks for being here and have a great day.
Yeah, thank you. Amazing.